What's good? You're listening to the Black Revolutionary Podcast, The Blueprint, where we hope to educate and motivate the Black community, because our unity is the pathway towards equal resources and equity in America. My name is Melody Angel, and you might know me as a singer-songwriter, but I'm also a community organizer as president of the Black Revolutionary Collective. And every Wednesday, I will break down the speeches and comments made by some of our most legendary Black revolutionary thinkers. Because maybe, just maybe, they already left us the blueprint that will finally unite our people so we can reach that mountaintop, that equality, that equity for all Black people in America, not just for the chosen few. Power to the people. Welcome to the second episode of the podcast. In this episode, we're going to be going over a speech that Fannie Lou Hamer gave in the 60s. Before I get into that, though, I'd like to share with you that I'm a singer-songwriter. That's what I do. And I'm often asked by interviewers how I got into it. And I always say that I was inspired by Prince to pick up the guitar, and I was also inspired by Sam Cooke to tell my story as a songwriter. But I'm also a community organizer. And the person that inspired me down this path was none other than Fannie Lou Hamer. So it's safe to say that she means quite a lot to me. So half of me is inspired to be an artist, and the other half is inspired to help my community. Fannie Lou Hamer's courageous actions spoke even louder than her powerful words. And that's what we all should be reaching for if we are intentional about helping our community. That's what it looks like. Our actions should speak louder than our words. Like I said, in this episode, I'm going to be reading and discussing a speech Fannie Lou Hamer gave at the Democratic National Convention on August 22nd, 1964. She spoke as the spokesperson for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. But first, let me give you some history on Miss Fannie Lou Hamer's life. Fannie Lou Townsend Hamer rose from humble beginnings in the Mississippi Delta to become one of the most important, passionate, and powerful voices of the civil and voting rights movements, and a leader in the efforts for greater economic opportunities for African Americans, and a leader in the efforts for greater economic opportunities for Black people. Hamer was born on October 6, 1917, in Montgomery County, Mississippi, the 20th and last child of sharecroppers Luella and James Townsend. She grew up in poverty, and at age 6, Hamer joined her family picking cotton. By age 12, she left school to work. In 1944, she married Perry Hamer, and the couple toiled on the Mississippi plantation owned by B.D. Marlowe until 1962. Because Hamer was the only worker who could read and write, she also served as plantation timekeeper. Now, I'm going to transition a little bit to explain the sharecropping thing, and all the references that I've used to gather this information will be in the description below if you want to look deeper into it. But I think it's important to explain sharecropping so that you understand what this government did to the so-called free Black people. Okay? When the war ended, many freed Black people saw the 40 acres and a mule policy as proof that they would finally be able to work their own land after years of servitude. Owning land was the key to economic independence and autonomy. Instead, as one of the first acts of Reconstruction, President Andrew Johnson ordered all land under federal control to be returned to its previous owners in the summer of 1865. So they gave black people some land and said, you free, give it a go out here, do work, earn your way, and blah, blah, blah. And then they gave it all back to the plantation owners that had it before, that had enslaved them. They just took the land back and gave it to white people. The Freedmen's Bureau, created to aid millions of former slaves in the post-war era, had to inform the freedmen and women that they could either sign labor contracts with planters or be evicted from the land they had occupied. Those who refused or resisted were eventually forced out by army troops. Now we're going to get into this thing called black codes. And it is as bad as you can imagine it to be by that title. In the early years of Reconstruction, most black people living in rural areas of the South were left without land and forced to work as laborers on large white-owned farms and plantations in order to earn a living. So, they said slavery was over, but all they could do was act as slaves. And when I say to earn a living, I mean these people were getting paid like 2 to 5 cents for working all day. It was the equivalent of no money. Okay? They couldn't buy a loaf of bread with what they made. Many clashed with former slave masters bent on reestablishing a gang labor system similar to the one that prevailed under slavery. In an effort to regulate the labor force and reassert white supremacy in the post-war South, legislators in former Confederate states soon passed restrictive laws denying black people legal equality or political rights and created black codes that forced former slaves to sign yearly labor contracts or be arrested in jail for vagrancy. They were literally given no choice, but they were free. These black codes provoked a fierce resistance among freed men and undermined support in the North for President Johnson's Reconstruction policies. A Republican victory in the congressional elections of 1866 led to the passage of the Reconstruction Acts in 1867, beginning a new phase of Reconstruction. During this period, the passage of the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment granted black people the right to vote, equality before the land, and other rights of citizenship. But not really. I mean, they made the amendment, but nobody enforced it. Ridiculous. We're not that bad. We freed them, but nobody enforced it. So it was like it didn't exist. And that's when the rise of the sharecropping system began. Despite giving black people the rights of citizens, the federal government and the Republican-controlled state governments formed during this phase of Reconstruction took little concrete action to help freed black people in the quest to own their own land. Instead of receiving wages for working in owners' land and having to submit to supervision and harsh discipline. The harsh discipline was the beatings that they had to take even when they were slaves. So they were still beating them, they were still hanging, they were still lynching black people. All of the torturous things that were happening under slavery were happening now as they were free. Ooh, it's not funny, but makes you feel a little nuts. Like, really, people? Okay. Most free men preferred to rent land for a fixed payment. By the early 1870s, the system known as sharecropping had come to dominate agriculture across the cotton planting South. Under this system, black families would rent small plots of land or shares to work themselves. In return, they would give a portion of their crop to the landowner at the end of the year. To that end, in 1865, Mississippi and South Carolina enacted the first black codes. Mississippi's law required black people to have written evidence of employment for the coming year each January. If they left before the end of the contract, they would be forced to forfeit earlier wages and were subject to arrest. So you literally could not quit your job. They made sure you were stuck there for the full year or you would lose the little money you could make. So that means no matter if you were beaten every day, no matter if you were raped, no matter if your children were taken from you, you had to stay on that land. They literally forced you by law. But you were free. Free, but keeps coming up. In South Carolina, a law prohibited black people from holding any occupation other than farmer or servant. You literally could be nothing else. Unless they paid an annual tax of $10 to $100. And when it says $10 to $100, you best believe it was $100. And if you think that a black person back then could come up with $100, you're nuts. This provision hit free black people already living in Charleston and former slaves especially hard. In both states, black people were given heavy penalties for vagrancy, including forced plantation labor in some cases. During this time also is when the development of policing really came to be a thing, because the police were there to ensure that black people weren't really free, that they did what they were told. Under Johnson's Reconstruction policies, nearly all the southern states would enact their own black codes in 1865 and 1866. Some states limited the type of property that black people could own, while virtually all the former Confederate states passed strict vagrancy and labor contract laws, as well as so-called anti-enticement measures designed to punish anyone who offered higher wages to a black laborer already under contract. Black people who broke labor contracts were subject to arrests, beatings, and forced labor. And apprenticeship laws forced many minors, either orphans or those whose parents were deemed unable to support them by a judge, into unpaid labor for white planters. So literally, a white person could just go get a friend that's a judge and say, yeah, I want these kids. So say that these black people ain't taking care of their kids, so I can get these kids for free so that they can work for me on my plantation. Literally, that's what was happening. That's what that means. They could just take your children. So you're free, but they can still sell off your children if they feel the need. Passed by a political system in which black people effectively had no choice, the black codes were enforced by all white police and state militia forces, often made up of Confederate veterans of the Civil War across the South. So literally the people who wanted you to still be slaves were the ones policing you. This is that whole make America great again for white people. That's the thing. The tagline is missing a few words because that's what that means, right? We all know that. But you're not going to make it great again for white people. You're not going to make it that great. It's already great. But you ain't about to make it that great, okay? Now that you know what was going on, what sharecropping was, This is the kind of situation that black people were in, even in this started in the 1860s, right? We're talking about 1866. And now we move forward to Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, and we're in 1960. We're in the 1960s now. Okay? That's how long this has been going on in some way, shape, or form in the South, right? Now, all this, like I said, is referenced in the description below if you want to read more on black codes. Some black people managed to acquire enough money to move from sharecropping to renting or owning land by the end of the 1860s, but many more went into debt and were forced by poverty or the threat of violence to sign unfair and exploitive sharecropping and labor contracts that left them little hope of improving their situation. Once they had you, they got you, they kept you, or they killed you. Lynching. Now that we've made that clear, let us get back to Fannie Lou Hamer's life. In 1961, Hamer received a hysterectomy by a white doctor without her consent while undergoing surgery to remove a uterine tumor. Such forced sterilization of black women as a way to reduce the black population was so widespread it was dubbed a Mississippi appendectomy. Unable to have children of their own, the Hamers adopted 2 daughters. Now, I have to stop here too, because this lands on an issue that we are also still going through today. Black women still receive substandard health care. It has been established and documented black women are 3 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes than white women, and every other race as well, to this day. We are always at the bottom of the list, where there should be no list. They gave this woman a hysterectomy against her will. They gave thousands of black women this when they would come in for help with something else. Took her ability to have children away because too many blacks were being born. Do you know how depraved a society has to be to allow this to go on? Okay, let me try to get through the rest of this. That summer, Hamer attended a meeting led by civil rights activist James Foreman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and James Bevel of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. That is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference is the group that Martin Luther King would come out of, okay? Hamer was incensed by efforts to deny blacks the right to vote. She became a SNCC organizer on August 31st, 1962, led 17 volunteers to register to vote at the Indianola, Mississippi courthouse, denied the right to vote due to an unfair literacy test. Yeah, because that's when they was giving us that ridiculous test. Once again, talking about how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, and if you got it wrong, you couldn't vote. And these are people that were asking that couldn't tell you what 2 + 2 was. Okay? Ignorant people. Ignorants, as I call them. So, the audacity. Anyway, the group was harassed on their way home when police stopped their bus and fined them $100 for the trumped-up charge that the bus was too yellow. Oh, God. That night, Marlowe fired Hamer for her attempt to vote. Her husband was required to stay until the harvest. And when I say required, I mean forced, or he would go to jail. So she lost her husband that night as well for the rest of the year. So she was on her own. Marlowe confiscated much of their property. The Hamers moved to Rouville, Mississippi in Sunflower County with very little. In June 1963, after successfully completing a voter registration program in Charleston, South Carolina, Hamer and several other black women were arrested for sitting in a whites-only bus station restaurant in Winona, Mississippi. At the Winona jailhouse, she and several of the women were brutally beaten, leaving Hamer with lifelong injuries from a blood clot in her eye, kidney damage, and leg damage. In 1964, Hamer's national reputation soared as she co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, MFDP, which challenged the local Democratic Party's efforts to block black participation. Hamer and other MFDP members went to the Democratic National Convention that year, arguing to be recognized as the official delegation. When Hamer spoke before the Credentials Committee, calling for mandatory integrated state delegations, President Lyndon Johnson held a television press conference so she would not get any television airtime. Her speech, which I'm going to read at the end of this, she gave this speech that was just amazing. And LBJ thought he was slick and would call a press conference so that the media would leave the courthouse and go to the White House for his little speech. It was some made up speech. He wasn't even saying nothing at the press conference. A reporter found out about it, and the reporter wrote up a story and said, that he did this. So then all the media outlets played Fannie Lou Hamer's speech in its entirety over and over again for like a week. So it completely backfired on him. And it changed the conversation in America about what was really going on in the South as far as voter registration was concerned. So I just love that story. I love when evil stuff backfires on evil people. And people be like, oh, well, LBJ, he's not evil. He helped us get the Civil Rights Act. Let me tell you something. He did that because at the time, white kids were joining the movement and dying. And that was not a good look. And he needed that to stop. So he let Martin come in and he said, here, we're going to sign this paper that says y'all get some more rights that they were not enforcing. Once again, they wrote up some laws that they still weren't enforcing to try to quiet us down. That's what LBJ did, okay? But it didn't work. He tried to play us for fools because that's what he thought we were. After that, by 1968, Hamer's vision for racial parity in delegations had become a reality, and Hamer was a member of Mississippi's first integrated delegation. In 1964, Hamer helped organize Freedom Summer, which brought hundreds of college students, black and white, to help with African American voter registration in the segregated South. In 1964, she announced her candidacy for the Mississippi House of Representatives, but was barred from the ballot. See, once again, she should not have been barred, but she was. You said she was free, but she wasn't. She wasn't your free. White people were free fully and completely, and black people were free with a whole bunch of stuff that they could not do. I'm going to keep saying it because that is the lesson for today, kids. Free, but is not free. And that's why it's important to make our freedoms equal. You don't even know what it really feels like. Neither do I. To be completely free in this country. In this 2022. let me stay on point here. Come on. I got to get through this. This is very difficult for me. I'm trying to throw in some humor and stuff because what the life that Fannie Lou lived was so incredibly unfair and hard. And it's hard because I'm thinking about my great-great-grandmother and aunties, and it's hard. So she announced her candidacy in 1964 for the Mississippi House of Representatives, but was barred from the ballot a year later. Hamer, Victoria Gray, and Annie Devine became the first black women to stand in the U.S. Congress when they unsuccessfully protested the Mississippi House election of 1964. The courage of these women. They literally could have been strung up in a tree for doing this, and they did it anyway. That's what was on the line. So you see, this is why I get so frustrated with my generation, because even though there is some danger involved in being a community organizer and being someone who speaks out and speaks up, it is not as dangerous as it was in the 60s. Where is the courage? Where is the sacrifice? We need to do it. If they could, we can. She also traveled extensively, giving powerful speeches on behalf of civil rights. In 1971, Hamer helped to found the National Women's Political Caucus. Frustrated by the political process, Hamer turned to economics as a strategy for greater racial equality. And this is where, she was ahead of her time, This is it. Economic power. It all starts here. And what she tried to do is exactly what we should be doing right now. It's what we should be focused on. It is it. You want to get somewhere in America. You want to change things for black people. We have got to contain and control and build economic power. I will say it in every single one of these podcasts and everywhere else I go to speak. In 1968, she began a pig bank to provide free pigs for black farmers to breed, raise, and slaughter. A year later, she launched the Freedom Farm Cooperative, FFC, buying up land that blacks could own and farm collectively. With the assistance of donors, including famed singer Harry Belafonte, she purchased 640 acres and launched a coop store, boutique, and sewing enterprise. She single-handedly ensured that 200 units of low-income housing were built. Many still exist in Rouville today. The FFC lasted until the mid-70s. At its heyday, it was among the largest employers in Sunflower County. Extensive travel and fundraising took Hamer away from the day-to-day operations, as did her failing health, and the FFC hobbled along until folding. Not long after, in 1977, Hamer died of breast cancer at age 59. She had it, y'all. She was building it. Land ownership, being able to employ our own people, she had it, and they dropped the ball. If they could do that in the 60s, in the 70s, there's nothing stopping us from doing it now. We can learn from this and build it up so nobody can drop the ball, so that it is something that lasts forever, for every generation. Imagine being able to actually be a Black community that can pass on land, that can pass on inheritance, because that's what white people do. That's what they get to do because they have economic power. We have to get to a place where we can pass on not just our stories and our culture to the next generation, but money. Now I'm going to get to the speech. Once again, for copyright issues, I can't just play you the speech of Fannie Lou Hamer at the DNC. So I have a transcript of what was said, and I'm going to read it to you. Once again, the link to the video of her actually giving the speech will be in the description. Please go watch it after you listen to this podcast. It is mesmerizing and it always makes me cry. I'm hoping that I can just read this and not cry. And hopefully that's what occurs here. I'm reading this in its entirety because her words deserve to be read and remembered and respected. Once again, she walked into a room of white men that could have ended her at the drop of a hat. She walked into this room anyway and told her truth. She fought for her place at the table, for our place at the table. Okay, here we go. Mr. Chairman and the Credentials Committee, my name is Miss Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rouville, Mississippi, Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Tennis. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register, to try to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by Mississippi men, highway patrol men, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Rouville, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Rouville, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children, who told me that the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down to try to register. After they told me, my husband came and said that the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, "Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I meant that." He said, "If you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave." Said, "Then if you go down and withdraw," he said, you might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi." And I addressed him and told him and said, "I did not try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. On the 10th of September 1962, 16 bullets was fired into the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Tucker for me. That same night, 2 girls were shot in Rouville, Mississippi. Also, Mr. Joe McDonald's house was shot in. And in June the 9th, 1963, I had attended a voter registration workshop, was returning back to Mississippi. 10 of us was traveling by the Continental Trailway bus. When we got to Winona, Mississippi, which is in Montgomery County, 4 of the people got off to use the washroom, and 2 of the people to use the restaurant. 2 of the people wanted to use the washroom. The 4 people that had gone in to use the restaurant was ordered out. During this time, I was on the bus. But when I looked through the window and saw they had rushed out, I got off the bus to see what had happened. And one of the ladies said it was a state highway patrolman, and a chief of police ordered us out. I got back on the bus, and one of the persons had used the washroom, got back on the bus too. As soon as I was seated on the bus, I saw when they began to get the 4 people in a highway patrolman's car. I stepped off the bus to see what was happening. And somebody screamed from the car that the 4 workers was in and said, "Get that one there." And when I went to get in the car, when the man told me I was under arrest, he kicked me. I was carried to the county jail and put in the booking room. They left some of the people in the booking room and began to place us in cells. I was placed in a cell with a young woman, Yvesta Simpson. After I was placed in a cell, I began to hear the sound of kicks and horrible screams. And I could hear somebody say, "Can you say yes, sir, nigger? Can you say yes, sir?" And they would say other horrible names. She would say, "Yes, I can say yes, sir." "So say it." She says, "I don't know you well enough." They beat her. I don't know how long. And after a while, she began to pray and ask God to have mercy on those people. And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrolman, and he asked me where I was from, and I told him Rouville. He said, "We're going to check this." And they left my cell, and it wasn't too long before they came back. He said, "You are from Rouville, all right." And he used a curse word, and he said, "We are going to make you wish you was dead." I was carried out of that cell into another cell where they had 2 Negro prisoners. The state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro to take the blackjack. The first Negro prisoner ordered me, by orders from the state highway patrolman, for me to lay down on a bunk bed on my face. And I laid on my face. The first Negro began to beat. And I was beat by the first Negro until he was exhausted. And I was holding my hands behind me at that time on my left side because I suffered from polio when I was 6 years old. After the first Negro had beat me until he was exhausted, the state highway patrolman ordered the second Negro to take the blackjack. The second Negro began to beat, and I began to work my feet. And the state highway patrolman ordered the first Negro who had beat to sit on my feet to keep me from working my feet. I began to scream, and one white man got up and began to beat me, my head, and told me to hush. One white man, my dress had worked up high. He worked over and pulled my dress down, and he pulled my dress back up. I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this is on account we wanted to register, to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you. And that was the end of her speech. On that day, they did not let her party sit. But as I said previously, it changed the conversation in America. They could no longer say that they had given black people the right to vote, when in fact you had stories like this going on every day. I want to say this. I didn't read that speech. No, let me say it this way. I read that speech for and to black people. This woman went through hell in order to vote, in order to be a part of not only voting, but also to be a part of the government, to speak for black people's needs, for their demands. You have no right to stand before all of these black people who sacrificed their life so that we could vote. There are a lot of voter suppression things going on, and I don't care. That is not going to be the new excuse as to why every single black person isn't voting. We should all be voting. I don't care how long the lines are. I don't care what ridiculous things they come up with. If you got to have an ID, if you got to have 2 IDs, get 2 IDs. If you don't know what the laws are, how they have changed in your state, there's no excuse for that. You Google that information and you make sure you're registered to vote. I don't care if you think you're registered, go and double check that you're registered to vote. You have no right to stand on the shoulders of people like Fannie Lou Hamer and tell me it's too hard to vote. You tell me what you've been through to vote, and I will tell you what they went through to vote. You tell me that your vote doesn't matter. And then I will show you the receipts of the billions of dollars that the opposition is paying yearly to make sure you don't have a desire to vote. Why would they spend their money stopping you from voting if your vote didn't matter? Wake up. Stop looking for an excuse not to get involved, because it's easier to stay oblivious. Ignorance is bliss. I've never felt bliss. I've always known. And I thank God I've always known who came before me, what they did for me, because it ensured that I became the kind of person that will do whatever it takes for a generation I will never meet. That is the mindset that we all must have. When you see these little black kids running around at a playground or at a school, when I see them, I think to myself, they don't even know yet. Not fully. They don't know yet what it fully means to be black in America, which means I still have time to change what it means to be black in America. When I look and I see my little niece and nephew, my nephew's 4 years old and my niece is 2, they have no idea right now. In this moment, as I speak to you, they have no idea what being black means yet. They have no idea what it meant 30 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But they will. They will get old enough to know what happened to their people, and it will break their heart like it broke mine. But I still have the opportunity to give them a better world that they can grow up in, to give them a safer, free, equal existence. And you damn right I'm going to do it, with or without you. But with you, with black people united, we can build something that lasts forever, and that is it. That is all that matters. And we might not live to enjoy it, but if we can leave it behind, it's worth everything. That's it for me this week. Next week, we will be diving deep into what it will take to gain economic power. We will go into detail on a discussion of group economics and group politics, what that will look like if we venture into it, which we should. We will be discussing the thoughts that Dr. Claude Anderson has For me, he is the only person I've ever seen really break down what Black people need to do as far as group economics and group politics is concerned. So we're going to go through his bullet points on that and discuss in detail what we need to start doing to build economic and political power for Black people. So that's next week's episode. I thank you again for listening or watching this episode. If you would like to help fund this podcast or the work that I'm doing with the Black Revolutionary Collective for the Black community, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/Black Revolutionary Collective. You can also visit our website at blackrevolutionarycollective.com. We're on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff as well. And those links will be at the end of this video and in the description. That's it. As always, be revolutionary and power to the people. Peace.
Give the power to the people. Give the power to the people. Yeah, yeah.